So it's 2:05 in the morning and I wake up to my wife's panic voice. They're in the car. They're in the car. And I stumble out of bed, barely awake, not even fully dressed, and I see 4 people outside. They jumped out of a stolen car and they're rummaging through my Toyota Land Cruiser. And without thinking, without grabbing my glasses, I snap. I rush out the door in this blind rage, charging straight at them, screaming like a man possessed. The anger hit me like a tidal wave. And before I knew it, I'm running out the street, yelling, cursing, completely consumed by fury. I went ape shit. And here's the thing. I'm not usually an angry person. I'm laid back and easygoing. But that night, I learned something important about anger. It's powerful and unpredictable. And when we don't understand it, it can control us. In this video, we're going to talk about exactly that. What anger really is, why we get angry, and how to stop it from taking over our lives. My name is Scott. I'm with Life Sketch Counseling and Coaching, and I've worked with countless individuals struggling with anger, and I'm here to share some strategies that actually work. In this video, we're going to walk through a simple 5-step process for managing your anger, rooted in evidence-based therapy interventions. We're going to talk about some strategies for calming down and reducing anger. You're going to gain concrete tools so you can stop reacting and start responding in a positive, productive way. Our goal is to control your anger and not let it to control you. And hey, before we get too far in, do the YouTube stuff. Share, like, subscribe, that sort of thing. Comment below if you have questions or want to continue the conversation. But for reals, if you know someone who would benefit from some of this information, please don't hesitate to share this video. I put a lot of time and energy and experience into this, rooted in some of the latest and most evidence-based types of psychology, as well as trying to make it actually practical and useful in real life. First, it's important to understand that anger is a secondary emotion. It's triggered by underlying feelings like fear, frustration, or being hurt. Again, it's this normal adaptive response. It can protect us, help us set boundaries. However, it becomes destructive when it's out of control, causing harm or self to our others. And anger that's overly suppressed can become toxic, where we become bitter, angry, or resentful people. Anger is ultimately a defense mechanism. When we perceive a threat, whether physical or emotional, anger jumps in to defend us. The problem is when anger becomes habitual. As I just said, anger is like a habit. It's a reflex that gets triggered over and over in predictable ways. The good news is, like any habit, it can be broken. But first, we need to understand the cycle. Let me paint you a picture. Several weeks ago, I'm driving on I-70 westbound into the mountains from Denver on a Friday afternoon. And it's a nightmare. The traffic is chaotic. Cars are speeding, stopping suddenly, weaving in and out of lanes. And as I was trying to keep enough space in between vehicles, a car in the right lane suddenly veers into mine, cutting me off. And I honk out a reflex, just letting the driver know that they nearly just hit me. And what do? Response? They flip me off. And now I am furious. When we think about why we get anger, it always starts with a trigger. This is that event that sets off the anger. For example, I was cut off in traffic. This is what sparked the process. And then there's this threat perception, where our brain processes this event, whether it's a feeling of disrespect, a violation of personal space, or a challenge to your safety. This interpretation is what transforms a situation from neutral to charged. And once that threat is perceived, our body immediately begins by activating the sympathetic nervous system, flooding us with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. This is our body's natural fight, flight, or freeze response. When that car cut me off, especially after he flipped me off, I could feel my heart racing, my muscles were tense, and my breathing was quickened. Note, this process is extremely fast. Before we can even explain what's happening, our body has already activated our autonomic nervous system. By nature, it's unconscious, involuntary, and almost immediately. We are quickly ready for battle. We next have our more conscious reactions and emotional and mental responses. We start with our thoughts, where we're interpreting the situation through our lens of anger, leading to automatic negative thoughts or irrational beliefs. My mind was consumed with judgment. This guy's an idiot. He's going to get someone killed. How dare he flip me off when he's in the wrong? This driver is reckless, and he doesn't care about anyone but himself. And then we get our emotional response. Our feelings associated with anger begin to surface, intensifying our responses. I was filled with a mix of fear and indignation. I feel disrespected, endangered, and justified in my rage. And then we have our behavioral responses. Our behavioral response is the culmination of our thoughts and emotions as they dictate our actions. You may shout, engage in aggressive driving, or intentionally stew about the situation, wishing for some retribution. For me, the next hour, I'm on edge. I was gripping the steering wheel tightly. I'm cursing terrible things under my breath. And I even find myself snapping at my kids in the back seat, still stewing over this driver's audacity. And the outcomes of our behavior can either lead to both positive or negative consequences. For example, we might temporarily feel a relief of satisfaction from expressing the anger, but it often comes at a cost of escalating the situation. There might be this immediate payoff where anger seems to numb our own pain, and when you yell, someone might listen, or when you act aggressively, others might back off. It feels powerful, even if it's fleeting. The long-term effects, however, can often be damaging. Over time, you might start to notice people becoming defensive or avoiding you or no longer responding unless you escalate. And over time, when anger becomes a habit, you begin to lose control over the situation. Let's continue with my example. After this initial incident, the driver speeds off and I'm left alone in my anger. For the rest of the drive, I can feel this anger simmering. Even though the situation is long over, and it's not just the driver I'm mad at anymore. Anyone who irritates me that day, my family, any other driver on the road. The consequences of this initial outburst linger far beyond the event itself. And understanding the full cycle of anger is the first step towards breaking it. Because once you know how it works, from the trigger to reaction to outcome, you can start to disrupt it. Let's dive into the 5 effective anger management techniques. These 5 simple steps that you can regain control of your emotions. This process is based in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and can help you break the cycle of anger at each stage. Here's how. Our first step that we want to do is start to reflect on the motivations around our anger. How has anger impacted your life? Dig deep and consider the positive and negative effects of anger manifestations. What do you want to change and why? What do you think it will take to achieve that change? So take a moment and assess anger in your own life and imagine how you'd like to respond to those negative events. This step is crucial because it's going to really dictate the rest of how we're going to respond strategically and intentionally. And then changing our anger starts with this awareness, right? We need to recognize that we are in a cycle, that we're stuck in the pattern in order to break free from autopilot. Anger can actually even serve as its own cue. For example, if after a meal I'm cleaning the kitchen and I notice that someone loaded the dishwasher incorrectly by my standards, and immediately I'm entering combat mode. My thoughts are racing about how inconsiderate the other person is, how I feel disrespected. My fists are clenched and my teeth are gritted. My heart rate elevates. And this is the moment to wake up and recognize that I'm in my anger cycle. And when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, it's difficult to think clearly. Right? I could have said, hey, thanks for trying to clean the dishwasher or load it so far. But we tend to fixate on this perceived threat. Before rational thinking occur, we must slow down, and calm ourselves. And we can use a lot of different, what are called grounding techniques, where certain types of coping skills. One of my favorite things to do is use some simple breathing exercises. I like to use box breathing or sometimes square breathing. Think about this as 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold, repeat. Repeat. There are other types of grounding techniques we could review too. By far, one of my most recommended is using any sort of mindfulness or meditation, where practice being present in the moment and coming back to focus. It's essentially the same skill that if you're trying to focus on something really small and you get distracted and come back to it, that's the same mental skill as regulating in anger. You can also use visualization techniques where you imagine how you would ideally like to handle that anger. You can exercise. This is another huge recommendation, because this anger and the cortisol and other hormones and chemicals that are released often stay in our body. So moving your body can actually help dissipate this anger. And the more intense that exercise, the more particularly effective it is. So go for a sprint, do some burpees or some push-ups or some squats. Do something to get that anger actually physically out of your body. You can also do a body scan. This is where you just start to notice where the tension, notice where the anger is in your body. Often mine's in my upper shoulders. So I might start to realize like, hey, I'm really tense right now. And then I start to intentionally let it go. In CBT, we also use this process called cognitive restructuring. And this is in our fourth step of reframing, where we're challenging and replacing negative, distorted beliefs with more positive or realistic thoughts. When we're reframing our negative thoughts, we challenge and replace those. So it's important to think objectively, where we want to review the situation and identify the true source of that anger. So here are a few common cognitive distortions or irrational beliefs that are related to anger. I'm only going to just mention a few of them. We have something like all or nothing thinking. They're always doing this to me. Or we have catastrophizing, where we say, this might ruin my whole day. We could even filter out the positive, where everything was going great until they did that. We want to capture each of these negative thoughts or these distorted beliefs, and then that's when we want to start to replace those with more productive thinking as well. So if they're always doing that for me, or if I say, hey, this guy doesn't care about anybody else, I might say, maybe he was in an emergency situation. Maybe he didn't see me. Maybe he thought my honking was a very aggressive type of noise that he heard. So we want to stop and rethink. And then the goal of anger management, as we're talking about, is to calm down by regulating your physical and mental reactions so that you can maintain and respond effectively. And that's where we are with step 5. The more we consciously change our behavior, the more we can respond in a healthy, reasonable way. We want to think about, in this situation, how would I ideally like to respond? Like, what would I really like to get out of this situation? And then that's what we want to start to determine, well, what can you actually do about it? I always like to think about what's in my direct control. Like, this is the stuff that I can immediately do something about, as well as maybe what's more in my sphere of influence. So I can't make that person, agree with me, but I can maybe communicate in a very clear way so that they can try to understand me at least. And then we also want to know what's out of our control. Like, what are the things that I should just be able to let go? And then we can also try to implement more assertive responses. Assertiveness, it's not passive, it's not aggressive, and it's certainly not passive aggressive. Assertive responses are direct and honest ways of communicating your needs, your feelings, and your opinions while still respecting others. You could use direct statements using I statements, right? I feel upset when you raise your voice at me. And look at what we did there. We said, I feel blank when you blink. And that's what we really want to make sure that when we're explaining that, we're not judging them necessarily, right? If I feel like you are a jerk, it's not really helpful. So we want to identify the behavior of what that person is doing to make you angry or upset. So in this case, I feel upset when you raise your voice at me. We could also request change. We could ask for specific behavioral changes. I would appreciate it if you could avoid using that tone of voice. I always think that a key and a healthy assertive response is really about setting boundaries, where we're going to clearly communicate your limits and those consequences. So you might say, I won't tolerate any more insults. If you do, I will leave. Right? So it's very matter of fact. It's actually not very emotionally charged when you're giving out some of these assertive responses either. All right. At the end of every video, we want to take a few moments and start to summarize with the key takeaways. So first, we're saying anger is a normal, natural, and adaptive secondary emotion designed to protect us from an actual or perceived threat. But we're rarely in circumstances that require aggression or violence. Like we're not often in combat or being chased by a bear. Anger is destructive by design, out of control, and it can destroy our health, relationships, and opportunities. Suppressed, and it can become toxic, where we become bitter and cynical. But if we can control our anger and not let it control us, then we can appreciate our anger and see it as our body's communication mechanism, alerting us that something isn't right. And then by regulating our physical and emotional responses, we can rationally understand our anger and respond in a proactive, productive way. We can challenge and replace those negative, distorted beliefs that only exacerbate anger. Then we can behave intentionally, strategically trying to resolve those issues, respond in an assertive way that's going to actually be able to help us. The first thing I want you to do is start to map out your anger triggers. This is where you think about what is actually happening. Then you can start to practice grounding techniques to calm down in those situations. You want to label those distorted beliefs and challenges, each with a more neutral, positive perspective, and then you can practice those assertive responses. But if you can't seem to get a hold of your anger, or if you're in your reflection stage and you realize the problem is way bigger or way deeper, then you might need to talk with a mental health professional. Consider working with a counselor or a life coach, someone to be able to process this with and practice some of these skills. All right, y'all, that's it for today. I appreciate your eyes and your ears. If you have questions, feel free to comment below and we can really start to continue that conversation. See you next time.